Hi, everyone. This is Derby Watch. I'm Brad Free with David Aragona. David, the biggest Derby Watch developments last week were splashy wins in Florida and in California that influenced the prices on two top Kentucky Derby contenders. We're going to talk about those performances in just a minute. But first, I want you to discuss the odds changes with regards to Forte, who won the Fountain of Youth, and Practical Move, who won the San Felipe.
Yeah, some might argue that Forte should have been the favorite all along since we started doing this from the first week, but I think the first week we did this was right on the heels of Arabian Night winning the Southwest. So much has changed since then. I sort of saw this coming last week prior to the Fountain of Youth with Forte training so strongly into his 3-year-old debut, and obviously we'll talk more about his performance, but he certainly delivered, picked up right where he left off, coming back off the layoff. So I did lower his price from 6-1 last week down to 4-1 this week. Really the solid Derby Watch favorite at this point in time. Arabian Night's back working, so his price held steady, but the other big movement was Practical Move, who I think I previously had at 30-1. He certainly rose in people's standing with his victory in the San Felipe last week, so I pegged him as the third choice at 10-1 right now.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I guess one could even argue that Practical Move may have gotten in front of Arabian Night as far as, who deserves to be the second choice, but no dispute from me with regards to Arabian Night and Practical Move, 8-1 and 10-1. We did have a little bit of movement, some ads and some drops from Derby Watch from last week. The drops are Cave Rock, who stayed reportedly in the Bob Baffert stable. That makes him ineligible for the Kentucky Derby. Hijazi finished kind of a disappointing fourth in the San Felipe, and Blazing Sevens, I don't know what happened to him in the Fountain of Youth. He did not show up. But we did have 3 additions to take the place of Cave Rock, Hijazi, and Blazing Sevens. Go Rocket Ride, Raise Cane, and Mage. David, Go Rocket Ride is a horse that we kind of talked about the last couple weeks. He ran pretty well in the San Felipe, and we're going to talk about that race in just a minute. But talk about the price with regards to Go Rocket Ride, who started all of 2 times.
Yeah, you'll notice that I put the top 3 finishers from the San Felipe, all with relatively short prices. They're all in our top 10 on Derby Watch now. Go Rocket Ride, I installed at 15-1 as he debuts on the list. Big effort in his second start. And also Skinner, who I think we previously had at 50-1, just coming off that maiden win. I slashed his price down to 20-1 with his good closing finish, third in that San Felipe. Also debuting on the list were Raise Cane and Mage. Raise Cane, obviously the 7-length Gotham winner in a bit of an upset, and Mage, the horse who had a bit of trouble in the Fountain of Youth. I know we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit.
Yeah, Go Rocket Ride, definitely one of the leading contenders, even though he's only started twice. Raise Cane, I don't know what to do with. We'll talk about the Gotham, and I think, David, you and I both have some reservations with regarding Mage, who ran a better-than-look fourth in the Fountain of Youth. He ran super. I don't know if that makes him a legitimate Kentucky Derby contender, but we will talk about that. But let's start off talking about the champion, the return of last year's juvenile champion, and that was Forte, who was expected to win the Fountain of Youth. Let's roll the tape, and David, tell us what you saw.
Yeah, I think the visual impression here is what really got a lot of people excited about this horse, because he just looked like a winner the entire way around the racetrack. He traveled very strongly down the backstretch. You could tell that Irad Ortiz just had to pick his path coming into that short stretch run. And once he wheeled him to the outside, he took over with ease. And you can see he's pretty much geared down at the end of this race, winning by about 4.5 lengths. This just felt like the perfect prep race coming back off the layoff. He'll probably start next time in the Florida Derby. And I don't know who's going to want to run against this horse to try to get their Derby points.
Yeah, when it comes to a comeback for a top-class 2-year-old, I just don't see how it could get any better than what we saw from Forte. He won big. He looked like he had a little something left. He won by 4. The figure was good. Really, I want to find a flaw, because I love to look at defects for favorites. At this stage, I know we're only in early March, I don't see a flaw in Forte. What about you?
I think the only outstanding question with Forte is just with regard to stamina, because he's still never gone farther than 1 mile and a 16th. He is a son of violence. We haven't talked a whole lot about his pedigree, but there is some stamina on the dam side. But that's the one question, that extra 3/16 of a mile that he'll have to deal with in the Kentucky Derby. But that's going to be a question for all of these horses. So he is definitely the clear leader of this division at this point in time.
Rocket Can is another horse that we talked about. I think we actually added him to Derby Watch last week when there were some spots open. He improved 9 buyer points, and I guess you have to at least respect his improving pattern. He's not in the same ballpark as Forte, but Rocket Can took a major step forward.
Yeah, I know both of us were not particularly thrilled with the Holy Bull immediately after that race, got a pretty low speed figure. It was encouraging to see Rocket Can take that step forward and battle on for second in this race. Just your typical Bill Mott trainee that seems to be improving with every start. And I know something that you had mentioned to me privately, that November 26th Churchill Downs allowance race that he's coming out of, along with Confidence Game and Hit Show, that's proven to be quite the productive race.
Yeah, Rocket Can, he's definitely getting better at the right time. Cyclone Mischief, he held third in the Fountain of Youth. To me, sometimes he shows up, sometimes he doesn't. I got to see him come back and do it again. And Mage, David, I think he ran super. He blew the brake. He was wide every step of the way. He tried to fight. He ran well. I don't think he's a Kentucky Derby horse, but he's on our list. What about Mage?
Yeah, one thing I will say about Fountain of Youth Day is when you watch all of the dirt races, you can build the argument that the rail was not the place to be on the dirt course. So maybe that worked against Cyclone Mischief a little bit, though like you, I don't want to make too many excuses for a horse that's a little unreliable. And as for Mage, he was outside the entire way, had some trouble at the start, had to adapt to a slightly different running style than what he used in his debut. Still have some doubts about added ground for him and whether he can progress in the time necessary to be a real Derby threat, but he did eke onto the list this week.
No doubts about Forte. Let's take a look at Forte's past performances, and this is what a legitimate early Kentucky Derby favorite looks like. I mean, his 2-year-old campaign was outstanding. He culminated with a win in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, and he returned as good as he was when he left. Looking back over the history of the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, I was kind of interested to find out that there have now been 6 Breeders' Cup Juvenile winners who returned in spring in a 2-turn race. Only 2 of them now won their comeback race, Forte, and the other one was Street Sense. The reason I bring it up is because Street Sense became the first Breeders' Cup Juvenile winner to go on to win the Kentucky Derby. Forte trying to follow in those footsteps, and that's what his past performances look like. And it is an outstanding career up until now, at least. Okay, let's go to California and talk about the San Felipe. I'll tell you what, there were a few 3-year-olds this winter that trained as well as Practical Move. However, I thought he might be up against it in the San Felipe, but the race lost a top contender when National Treasure scratched with a foot issue. And some of the other horses, Hijazi didn't really show up. He showed up part way. But I think what we saw from Practical Move, David, he is an elite 3-year-old. Let's roll the tape and you can talk about the San Felipe.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. Tim Yachteen's best Derby hopeful might have been in his barn from day one. This horse had shown some promise as a 2-year-old, though he did upset the field when he won that Los Alamitos Futurity and had taken a big step forward that day. And I think the question with him coming off the layoff was he just an improving horse, or was that some kind of Los Alamitos fluke? Well, he definitely is just an improving horse because he ran to those impressive workouts with this victory. And what I really liked about this race was the gallop out. He just ran away from this field by more than 5 lengths on the gallop out. He was not stopping at the end. So that gives some confidence in him potentially stretching out to further distances. Obviously, there is some concern with him being by Practical Joke, who's known as more of a 1-turn sire, but he doesn't necessarily look like most progeny of Practical Joke, a much more robust horse. So he's one that I think has definitely solidified his status as a major player marching towards the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, Practical Move. I got a chance to be close to him in the winner's circle after the San Felipe. And this guy has really turned into an absolute beast over winter. He's big, he's strong. I've seen some horses come out of a race like the San Felipe and they look like they've, been through the ringer. I'll tell you what, Practical Move, he just looks like a big, solid colt that can withstand the rigors of the Kentucky Derby Trail. So he is absolutely legitimate. He's in the top 3. Go Rocket Ride. He looked like he might have been losing position coming into the stretch. He showed some guts re-rallying down along the inside. What'd you think about Go Rocket Ride in his second career start?
Yeah, he looked like a horse that was losing ground, was maybe throwing in the towel coming to the quarter pole, and he moved back down to the inside, kind of switching paths with Hejazi coming into the stretch, and he re-rallied to come back for second and finished up pretty strongly for his first try going the 2 turns. I think he showed some really likable attributes in this race, more versatility than we had seen from him in his debut. It's still a big ask for this horse to be ready to have success in the Kentucky Derby off just 3 career starts, but he clearly is a horse with a lot of talent.
He is a horse with a lot of talent, and Mandela will not take him to Kentucky unless Go Rocket Ride reestablishes himself or runs well enough in the Santa Anita Derby to warrant taking a chance. Mandela said, look, it all has to be perfect. He knows he's up against it with a lightly raced colt who's only started twice. So the Santa Anita Derby is going to be kind of the make or break type of race for Go Rocket Ride. I liked what I saw from Skinner. He can't win. No horse, very few horses anyway, can win a Santa Anita dirt route coming from as far off the pace as Skinner. He was a little bit late switching leads. When he finally did, he leveled off. He kind of lost his punch a little bit. But I think that Skinner, coming in off a maiden win 3 weeks earlier, ran well enough to be considered a legitimate Kentucky Derby prospect. What about you?
Yeah, there really was not a whole lot of closing going on Saturday at Santa Anita, which I know, as you said, is kind of in keeping with the typical pattern there. And the pace of this San Felipe was not particularly fast. I mean, they weren't walking up front, but it was pretty even throughout and really played to the strengths of the horses that were forwardly placed. And Skinner was the only horse that made up that kind of ground to be third. So I thought it was a step in the right direction for him, and hopefully we'll learn more about him in the Santa Anita Derby. But that seems like the kind of race that could be right up his alley if he continues progressing.
I think 1.25 miles will be right up Skinner's alley, to be honest. I honestly don't think he can win the Santa Anita Derby if Practical Move and or Arabian Night show up in that race, but I expect Skinner to run well. And then I think we'll see his best on the first Saturday in May, and we'll find out if he's really as good as I think he is anyway. Hejazi misfired. He was kind of getting out much of the race. Mike Smith had a very strong hold on the left rein. He left the door open for a Practical Move to sneak through inside. Hejazi looks like a one-turn horse, which I think, David, you kind of suspected all along. Let's take a quick peek at the past performances of Practical Move. This is what one of the top 3-year-olds in California looks like. His 2-year-old campaign was progressive. He got better every passing race, culminating with that sharp win in the Los Alfuturity, which turned out to be a much stronger race than any of us thought at the time. 4th place finisher Tall Boy has since won a Group 3 in Dubai. Practical Move came back as an improved 3-year-old colt with a decisive win, a career best figure of 100. And let's take a look at and compare Forte and Practical Move. There they are, 2 of the top contenders. They're both well-seasoned. They've both started 6 times. These are 2 horses, David, that I honestly cannot find a flaw in. You mentioned maybe pedigree is a potential issue, but based on form, I think that most handicappers would agree these are 2 legitimate Derby prospects in early May. Agree or no?
Totally. As far as the Derby preps that we've seen so far in 2023 are concerned, those are the 2 best efforts, the Fountain of Youth and the San Felipe. And they are the 2 of the top contenders, at least right now, for the Kentucky Derby. Obviously, we'll see if Arabian Night can take a step forward when he finally does return to the races, likely in the Santa Anita Derby. But Forte and Practical Move, they are certainly in most people's top 3s, and Forte, the leading contender coming off this past weekend.
Forte and Practical Move. Okay, let's go to New York, where the Gotham Stakes was run. It's a 1-turn mile, and I think I said this last week. If you're running a 1-turn mile in late February, early March, you're probably not a Kentucky Derby candidate, but maybe the winner is. David, let's take a look at the stretch run and tell us what you saw from Raise Cane.
I certainly didn't expect any horse to be winning the Gotham by over 7 lengths, just given how competitive this race looked on paper. 14 horses went to the starting gate. 13 completed the race with their riders. As you can see, How Great Is Nate, the horse that did drop his rider at the start, is actually finishing alongside the eventual winner, Raise Cane, as they come on to the finish here. But he was the only one that was in range of Raise Cane at the wire. This horse did get a great trip to win the race, had to briefly pause in traffic around the far turn. But I think the real story of the Gotham is because there was a hot contested pace on the front end that completely fell apart. And the horses that were 11th, 12th, and 13th in the early stages were first, second, and third across the wire. So it was just your prototypical pace collapse.
Let's take a look at the race chart of the Gotham, and we'll see exactly what David was talking about. The top three finishers, Raise Cane, Slip Mahoney, and General Banker, they were positioned 11th, 13th, and 12th after the first quarter mile, 9th, 13th, and 12th. You can see that the race shape worked in favor of three come-from-behinders, including Raise Cane, who was good enough to take advantage of the situation and win off by 7. I guess we'll find out if this race was legitimate when he shows up next time in the Wood Memorial. And David, looking at that chart, I think you have to at least give a tip of the cap to fourth place finisher Eyeing Clover, who was up there close to that hot pace and barely got nailed for third. He ended up fourth for Eyeing Clover. I thought he ran actually fairly well under the circumstances. I know he was the favorite and he finished off the board, but Eyeing Clover, his effort was creditable. Agree?
Yeah, he ran pretty well, all things considered, for his first try going beyond 6 furlongs. I know I was skeptical of him as the favorite going into the race, and he probably did run the best race of the short prices in the Gotham to be fourth, just beaten out of second by about a length and a half. But I don't want to get too excited by anybody that finished behind Raise Cane, because Slip Mahoney on down, they all earned buyers in the mid to high 70s, the other horses that were achieving superfecta placings in the Gotham. So not sure how much credit I want to give those horses, but I think this is a field that we're going to have to learn a lot more about these runners in their subsequent starts.
Very difficult race to analyze. One turn in the mud. Raise Cane gets a chance to validate that performance when he shows up next month in the Wood at Aqueduct. Okay, before we sign off, just a quick brief mention. John Battaglia was won by a horse named Congruent. He'll run next, we believe, in the Jeff Ruby against Fantastic Again, Major Dude, and Two Phils has now joined the Jeff Ruby field. I don't think the Battaglia was a great race. We're going to find out in the Jeff Ruby. And the European road toward the Kentucky Derby kicked off for 2023 with a win by a horse named Cairo at Dundalk. Until these, Japanese and or European horses connections start showing that they're really serious about shipping over here, I think all we can really do is at least mention their names, those being Congruent and Cairo, and then we'll find out more as we get a little bit closer. So that's basically a wrap. Forte cemented his status as the early Derby favorite. Practical Move moves way up the list with a dominating win this San Felipe. We hope that you stick around for the preview segment, which is my finale before I'm off for a week. For David Aragona, I'm Brad Free, and we'll see you in the next segment.